everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to put on our detective hats and dive into the world of medical investigations. We're breaking down one of the most important tools in the toolkit, the case control study. We'll look at how they work, why they're so incredibly useful, and how they help scientists solve urgent medical mysteries.
So picture this. Out of nowhere, a strange, unexplained illness starts popping up in a community. People are getting sick, and doctors are scrambling for answers. The clock is ticking. So how in the world do you find the cause before things get even worse? Well, that's the exact problem we're going to tackle today. Here's our game plan. First, we'll set up the mystery. Then, we'll figure out how to identify the key players, our cases and controls. After that, we'll go searching for clues, weigh all the evidence we find, and finally, be honest about the limitations of this whole approach. All right, let's get this investigation started. To solve any mystery, you need the right tool for the job. So let's begin by really understanding our primary piece of equipment. What is a case control study anyway? Okay, so this is the key. A case control study is what we call retrospective, which is just a fancy way of saying it works backward. You start with the outcome, the disease, which has already happened. You find a group of people who have the condition, those are your cases, and then you find a similar group of people who don't have it, those are your controls. The entire goal is to look back in time and ask, was there some kind of exposure that was way more common in the group that got sick?
To make this all feel a bit more real, let's follow one investigation from start to finish. So imagine a hospital suddenly sees a spike in a really serious eye infection called endophthalmitis. And it's only happening to patients who recently had surgery. That right there is our medical mystery.
So we have our mystery. Now the real detective work can begin. And the very first step in any investigation is to identify the people involved. In our world, that means we need to clearly define our two crucial groups, the cases and the controls. Now, the absolute key to a good study is being precise. Our cases are pretty straightforward. They're the patients who got the eye infection. But you have to be super specific. When did they get it? Did it have to be confirmed by a lab test? Then you have the controls, and this part is just as important. They need to be as similar to the cases as possible. Same age range, same gender balance, maybe even operated on around the same time. But they didn't get sick. They also had to have a similar risk, which means we probably pick other patients who had similar eye surgeries, not someone who came in with an unrelated injury.
This process of picking controls is called matching, and it's a real balancing act. You want the groups to be comparable, for sure, but you can actually go too far. It's called overmatching. For instance, if you decided to match cases and controls based on the exact type of surgery they had, you'd completely lose the ability to see if that specific surgery was the risk factor you were looking for. It just hides the clue. And here's something interesting. To make the results more reliable, to boost what's called statistical power, researchers often use one or two really well-matched controls for every one case. Any more than that, and you don't really get much more bang for your buck.
Okay, so we've got our groups perfectly defined and matched. Now, the real sleuthing can begin. It's time to go back in time and gather all the clues we can from the history of everyone in our study. The process from here is actually pretty logical. We've got our groups. Now we go back and collect the same data from both of them, digging through medical records, maybe interviewing the patients themselves. Then comes the comparison. Was there a specific drug, a certain piece of equipment, something else entirely that was more common in the group that got the infection? And finally, we crunch the numbers to see just how strong that link really is.
But, and this is a big but, this whole looking back thing comes with a massive challenge. I mean, think about it for a second. Can you remember every single thing you did last month? Heck, even last week? Probably not. And this is where one of the biggest potential traps in these studies lies.
It's called recall bias. See, someone who's sick, one of our cases, is naturally going to be thinking, why me? What caused this? They might search their memory and recall details that a healthy person, a control, would have totally forgotten about. It's not intentional, it's just human nature. But that difference in memory can create a false connection, a phantom clue that points you in the wrong direction and skews the whole investigation. So we've seen how it works, and we've seen a pretty big potential pitfall. And this brings us to a really important point. Just like any tool a detective uses, a case control study isn't perfect. It's all about trade-offs. It has some absolutely incredible strengths that make it the go-to choice, especially when time is of the essence. But to be a good investigator, you have to look at all sides of the story. And that means we also have to be really honest about the significant limitations, the things we have to keep in mind before we jump to any conclusions. This table really lays it all out for us. On the one hand, the advantages are huge. These studies are fast, they're relatively cheap, which makes them perfect for an emergency outbreak. They're also amazing for studying rare diseases because, well, you start with a few people who already have it. Plus, you can look for a bunch of different risk factors all at once. But on the flip side, the disadvantages are real. They can't tell you how many new cases are happening. We've already talked about how prone they are to bias. Their success often hinges on how good the old medical records are. And as we saw, choosing the right controls is incredibly tricky and can make or break the entire study.
So what's the bottom line? Case control studies are these powerful, efficient tools for finding clues in a medical mystery. No, they're not perfect, but when they're used carefully, they can quickly point investigators in the right direction. And that leaves us with one final thought. With this tool now in your back pocket, if you were the detective, what health mystery would you want to solve first?